Part 43. The Prince longs for me every night after mastering thought reading. Author, Gongzi Iyun Si. Chapter 421. Wan Xian paused when she heard this and nodded timidly. Young girl dares. Xiao Jinyu couldn't help but give a thumbs up when he heard this. You are so brave, you dare to eat even if you are afraid. Wan Xian lowered her eyes and explained faintly, people's daughters have been timid since childhood. Since their relatives died one by one, people's daughters have had to become bolder. Only then did Xiao Jinyu realize that she was quite pitiful. She had no relatives when she was only 15 years old. In this place where you have no friends, you still have to cheer up. Wan Xian blessed her body. I am from the Women's Association of the People, thank you King Yu for your concern. I want to catch rabbits, so I'll leave first. After Xiao Jinyu finished speaking, he couldn't wait to turn around and walk towards the woods not far away. Concubine Su and Tao Liangyuan came out to look for Shen Shuwei after they had rested enough. They saw Shen Shuwei from a distance and waved and shouted to her excitedly. Princess, this way. Shen Shuwei turned around and saw Concubine Su and Tao Liangyuan waving to her, and she walked over. Wan Xian stood there, watching Xiao Jinyu's leaving figure, pursed her lips and followed him. Concubine Su looked at the woman not far away and asked Shen Shuwei doubtfully, Crown Princess, who is that woman? Shen Shu said softly, it's Wan Xian, the person close to the Queen Mother. Tao Liangyuan asked, why is she here? I don't know either. Shen Shuwei's mind was not on this. She chuckled and said, how about we roast the rabbit now? It's very delicious. As early as when Xiao Jinyu talked about roasting rabbits and roasting wild robes, she was so greedy that she had to catch a rabbit to satisfy her cravings. Concubine Su waved her handkerchief in agreement. Okay, I haven't eaten wild rabbit before, it must be delicious. Tao Liangyuan became greedy after hearing this. I haven't eaten it either, but the princess said it tastes good. Let's go. Shen Shuwei took them to catch rabbits. After a few steps, she stopped again. We have to find Chengzi first. Concubine Su and Tao Liangyuan nodded, turned around and went to find Chengzi. Chengzi returned to the camp after cleaning up but did not see Shen Shuwei. Thinking of the fact that Shen Shuwei had been seriously injured while going hunting in Kaiwei the year before, she was frightened and ran out to find someone in a hurry. Master, where have you been? After running a few steps, he saw Shen Shuwei and Su Tao walking towards the side, and he breathed a sigh of relief. Chengzi trotted up to meet him. Master, where have you been? You scared me to death. It's okay, am I fine? Shen Shuwei comforted him a few words and then started talking about business. Chengzi, let's go roast the rabbit. Chengzi nodded without thinking. Okay, slave, go get the tools and seasonings. Shen Shu nodded slightly. Let's go catch rabbits. After discussion, take separate actions. Concubine Su was a little worried. Princess, the rabbit runs so fast, can we catch it? It's dark and we can't even see the rabbit fur. Tao Liangyuan suggested, you can use a bear trap. The animal trap is too troublesome. Shen Shuwei said as he walked. Let's go to the woods first and set a trap. Concubine Su and Tao Liangyuan nodded in agreement. When she came to the woods, Shen Shuwei looked around and saw cinnamon. The vine is a perennial vine, and the vines are perfect for use as ropes. She tore off several pieces of gambling material and tied them into knots to form a vine about 3 meters long. She tied the vine with a slip knot and placed it on the ground. She took the other end of the vine and hid behind the big tree. Concubine Su looked at such an obvious trap with worried eyes. She tugged on Shen Shuwei's sleeve and asked in a low voice, Crown Princess, is this okay? Shen Shuwei said confidently, this is how I used to catch rabbits. Tao Liangyuan couldn't help but ask, did you catch it in the end? Shen Shu touched his chin slightly, sometimes I can catch it and sometimes I can't. Concubine Su expressed doubts, half probability, then when can we catch the rabbit? Shen Shuwei explained, sometimes the trap fails to catch the rabbit. That's because it encounters a stupid rabbit and runs too fast and hits a tree and faints. Concubine Su couldn't help laughing, Princess, are you sure you're not the stupid rabbit who fell into a trap? Shen Shuwei explained, falling into a trap means you were careless, but hitting a tree is different. Concubine Su and Tao Liangyuan looked at each other and had no words to refute. Chengzi ran back to the camp and took out a crossbody bag, which was full of tools and seasonings for barbecue. She slung it on her shoulder and was about to go find Shen Shuwei when she saw a tall figure in the distance. Hey, isn't that Qin Xiao? Who is that woman opposite? Chengzi walked over with doubts. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Duckweed hurriedly took out a handkerchief and wiped the water drops on Qin Xiao's body. Qin Xiao had just finished his work and was about to return to the tent when a woman suddenly ran out of the tent on the right side. He couldn't dodge and bumped into each other. The woman was holding a basin in her hand and all the water in the basin was poured on him. He looked down at the wet clothes, and then saw the woman wiping them hard for him. He pushed her hand away and said, "No need." Duckweed raised his head and looked at Qin Xiao, blushing and apologizing, "I didn't see you coming when I came out just now. Why don't you change your clothes and I will wash them for you and send them to you after they are dried?" "No, just be careful next time." Qin Xiao patted the water on his body, turned around and wanted to leave. When Duckweed grabbed the handkerchief in her hand and saw Qin Xiao was about to leave, she chased after him with a stern look on her face. "I feel really sorry for you to be like this, so just let me help you wash your clothes, okay?" "No need." Qin Xiao continued walking with a cold face. "I feel really sorry." Duckweed chased after him without giving up. After catching up, he deliberately pretended to fall. Qin Xiao quickly reached out to grab her arm and pulled her up, causing her to fall into his arms. Chengzi came over just in time to see the scene. Her almond-shaped eyes widened, the blue sky and the white sun, hugging each other. "What do you mean?" Qin Xiao saw Chengzi coming and hurriedly pushed the woman in his arms aside. How strong is Qin Xiao? With just such a push, Duckweed's center of gravity became unstable. He took 2 steps back and hit the tree behind him, almost falling to the ground. Qin Xiao took a few steps forward happily. "Chengzi, what are you doing?" Chengzi glared at Qin Xiao. "What does it have to do with you?" Qin Xiao had never been bullied by Chun 11 before. This was the first time he was bullied. He was a little confused for a moment. Did he do something wrong? Chengzi turned her head to look at Duckweed, looking weak and unable to take care of herself. "Didn't you say yesterday that women should love themselves? Why are you crawling into men's arms today? Are you still shameless?" Duckweed wiped away her tears and said, feeling extremely aggrieved, "Sister Chengzi, you misunderstood. He and I were innocent. It was just an accident." Chengzi retorted, "I'm only 17 this year. You were 19 before, right? Is it appropriate to call me sister?" Duckweed was dissatisfied with deliberately telling her age in front of Garchin, but still acted like a weakling on the surface. "Sister Chengzi, it's my blindness, don't be angry, today is really." Chengzi sneered, "You got the wrong person, I don't have a sister." Duckweed was embarrassed and at a loss. She looked at Garchin and said, "Brother Guard, I'm sorry. I didn't know Chengzi would misunderstand and be so angry." Chengzi had goosebumps all over the floor after hearing this. "Weren't you very fierce in the carriage yesterday? How could you be so weak now? So you have 2 faces? You really have learned a lot." Duckweed looked at her innocently. "Chengzi, what did you say? Why can't I understand? You continue to act, I don't have time to accompany you, so bye-bye." Chengzi snorted, turned around and left. Qin Xiao saw Chun 11 leaving and hurriedly chased after him. Chun 11. When Duckweed saw that Qin Xiao was gone, She stamped her feet angrily. There was no man who didn't want to spend money, so she didn't believe that Changzi could keep Qin Xiao. Qin Xiao quickly caught up with Changzi and grabbed her wrist. "Why are you ignoring me?" Changzi said angrily, "Why are you following me? Go hug her." Qin Xiao explained, "Changzi, I didn't hug her anymore, it was just that she was about to fall, so I helped her." Chun 11 stopped suddenly, and Qin Xiao, who was frightened, also stopped and looked at Chun 11 with a puzzled look. Changzi turned around and looked at Qin Xiao poking his strong chest with her fingers. Qin Xiao subconsciously stepped back. Changzi said without any politeness, "I just helped her into your arms. Why didn't you tell her that you wanted to hold her in your heart?" "Changzi, I didn't want to hug her. Besides." Qin Xiao held the little hand on his chest, looked down at Changzi, and said very seriously, "The person I want to hug is you." After knowing each other for so long, Qin Xiao always wanted to hug Changzi, but he didn't dare. Changzi blushed and wanted to pull her hand away, but Qin Xiao was too strong and she couldn't pull it back. Chun was so angry that she blushed even more. "You are so shameless. There are differences between men and women. How could you say such things to me casually?" Qin Xiao held it in for a long time and shouted, "Because I want to marry you as my wife." He had been holding back the sentence for a year and never had the chance to say it. This time he finally said it. After just saying that, he stared at Changzi expectantly, but also very nervous at the same time. Changzi was startled by Qin Xiao's roar, and then her face turned red when she heard what he said. She hesitated and said, What do you mean by saying this? After all, I am also the maid in charge of the crown princess, and you can marry me as long as you want? Do you really think that I am as casual as that maid?" Changzi withdrew her hand forcefully and ran away with a blushing face. "I thought to myself that for such an old man, don't you know that you need a matchmaker to ask for a hand in marriage? How can you say it yourself?" Qin Xiao froze on the spot, staring blankly at Chun 11's leaving figure, feeling a little annoyed. Sure enough, impulsiveness is the devil. You shouldn't have said it so directly to scare people away. He scratched his head irritably and thought for a while before following. In the woods, you can hear the chirping of insects and birds all the time. Shen Chu Wei stared at the trap calmly, looking forward to the arrival of the rabbit. Just when concubine Su thought she couldn't catch the rabbit, a rabbit suddenly ran out of the grass. The rabbit was very alert. It may have discovered someone behind the tree, so it turned around and ran away. Seeing that the rabbit ran away, concubine Su said a little disappointedly, "Princess, the rabbit ran away. The prince longs for me every night after mastering thought reading." Author, Gongzi Yun Si. Chapter 422. Shen Shuwei was calm and looked at the rabbit that ran away. If only it had been dumber and hit the tree. As soon as the words fell, the rabbit panicked and hit the tree opposite, and fainted. Concubine Su opened her eyes wide and grabbed Shen Shuwei's hand excitedly. "The rabbit really hit the tree, Crown Princess, you are amazing." Tao Liangyuan was also stunned. "This works." Shen Shuwei chuckled twice, trotted over, bent down, and picked up the wild rabbit on the ground, and came back happily. "Now we have roasted rabbit to eat." Concubine Su stared at the wild rabbit in Shen Shuwei's hand for a long time. When she looked up at Shen Shuwei, she was still a little unbelievable. "Crown Princess, is this how you used to catch rabbits?" Shen Shuwei nodded. "Yes, I always catch rabbits this way, and I always catch one." Concubine Su gave a thumbs up. "Great." Changzi saw Shen Shuwei from a distance. She trotted over and saw the rabbit in Shen Shuwei's hand. She said excitedly, "Master, you are so fast. You caught the rabbit so quickly." Shen Shuwei was quite proud, of course. Tao Liangyuan found that Changzi's face was particularly red, and asked in confusion, "Changzi, are you sick? Your face is so red." Changzi touched his face and found that it was very hot. He knew it was red without looking. Upon hearing this, Shen Shuwei freed one hand to grab Changzi's wrist, put her fingers on her pulse, and shook her head. After a few seconds, Changzi is in good health, not sick. Changzi thought of what happened just now, and guessed why her face was so red. She hurriedly took the wild rabbit from Shen Shuwei. "I'm fine, let's go roast the rabbit." Concubine Su said, "Let's go, I'm craving for it." Shen Shuwei was also craving for it, and the group walked back. Meeting Qin Xiao halfway, Changzi was stunned for a moment. She didn't expect Qin Xiao to follow her. Thinking of what he said just now, the heat on her cheeks had just subsided, and now it started to heat up again. Qin Xiao stepped forward and saluted, "Crown Princess, Concubine Su, Tao Liang Yuan." Shen Shuwei looked puzzled at Qin Xiao. Shouldn't Xiao Jinyan's personal guard follow Xiao Jinyan closely? "Guard Qin, why are you here?" Qin Xiao raised his eyes to look at Changzi. "I followed Changzi here." Seeing Changzi holding a wild rabbit in her hand, he took the initiative to take the rabbit from her hand. "I'll help you." Changzi was so embarrassed that she didn't react until the wild rabbit was taken away by Qin Xiao, and her face turned redder. Concubine Su looked at the two people's actions and said with a smile, "Guard Qin and Changzi have a good relationship." Shen Shuwei nodded in agreement, "Of course, Your Highness, and I live next door, and they are very familiar with each other." Tao Liangyuan saw Changzi's face blushing again, and the shy little woman's behavior, and couldn't help but joked, "I think Guard Qin and Miss Changzi have more than a good relationship." Qin Xiao lowered his eyes and looked at Changzi and said, "I'll go deal with the rabbit." Changzi lowered her head and didn't look at Qin Xiao. "If you want to go, go, why are you talking to me?" "Really?" Seeing Changzi ignore him, Qin Xiao said, "Changzi, come with me. I can give it to you after I finish it." Shen Shuwei, Su Tao and the other two looked at the two people in front of them without blinking, and they all felt that something was wrong. Changzi found that Shen Shuwei and the others were watching, and felt ashamed and annoyed. "I won't go." Qin Xiao saw that Changzi was unwilling, and it was not easy to force her, so he took the wild rabbit and went to the river to deal with it. After Qin Xiao left, Changzi breathed a sigh of relief. The group returned to the tent and started to build a fire. The firewood was ready, because at this time of year, firewood would be prepared in advance. Changzi prepared the rack and the seasoning in advance, and waited for the rabbit. It was the first time for Concubine Su and Tao Liangyuan to build a bonfire outside to roast rabbits, which was novel and exciting. Qin Xiao always worked very fast. After a while, he took the processed and cleaned rabbit and handed it to Changzi. Changzi raised her head. When she took the rabbit from Qin Xiao's hand, she didn't dare to look at Qin Xiao. She took the rabbit and lowered her head to pickle it. Qin Xiao saw that Changzi still ignored him, and felt that he had said something wrong just now. As the prince's personal guard, he didn't have so much free time. If he wanted to admit his mistake, he could only find another time. After Qin Xiao left, Changzi dared to raise her head. At this time, in the emperor's tent. After the emperor left, only the queen stayed in the tent, and Qingying, who served him personally. After resting for an hour, people also recovered. After living with the babies for a while, every day was very lively. Now looking at the quiet tent is a little unaccustomed. Qingying brought a cup of new tea and placed it in front of the queen, and asked in a gentle voice, "Queen, are you hungry? I'll have someone prepare some food." The queen shook her head, "I don't have much appetite." Thinking of Shen Shuwei, she suddenly looked up at Qingying, "Go and see the crown princess." Qingying replied, "Okay." The queen walked out of the tent and headed for the prince's tent. She smelled the fragrance before she got there. She asked Qingying in confusion, "Qingying, do you smell the fragrance?" Qingying said, "I smell it, It seems to be the smell of barbecue. The queen was actually hungry a long time ago, but she didn't have much appetite. When she smelled the aroma of barbecue, she immediately had an appetite. Who is grilling meat at this time? Go and take a look. The queen followed the smell all the way over and saw a fire not far away with a few people sitting next to it. The fragrance came from there. When they got closer, the queen agreed to sit by the fire, and it was none other than the crown princess and concubine Su. You guys really know how to enjoy it? Are you going to start roasting rabbits now? Shen Shuwei looked up and saw the queen coming, and stood up to greet her. Mother, you're just in time. Let's roast rabbits. Su Tao and the others also stood up and bowed with Shen Shuwei. The queen smelled the smell and felt hungry. She smiled and said, "You're quite fast, but I'm a little hungry. I just caught up." With Qingying's support, she sat on a small stool by the fire and asked them to sit down as well. "I'll go get some seasonings." Shen Shuwei stood up and ran into the tent, taking out the hot sauce and pancakes. Roasting rabbit meat with pancakes can reduce greasiness. The pancakes were made in advance and put into the space. The space has refrigeration and preservation functions, so the food can remain unchanged. When Shen Shuwei came back with the seasonings, everyone looked at her with curiosity and more expectation. Watching Shen Shuwei put the things on the tray on the table one by one, hot sauce, and thin pancakes. There was also a pot of hot tea to relieve greasiness. The queen was hungry and couldn't wait to roast the rabbit. She looked at the pancakes on the table and asked Shen Shuwei curiously, "Crown Princess, how do you eat this pancake?" Shen Shuwei poured a cup of tea for the queen, concubine Su, and Tao Liangyuan. "This pancake is not very delicious when eaten alone, but it tastes good when rolled with roasted rabbit meat." The queen said with a little regret, "I thought it could be eaten alone." Here, Chengzi had already roasted the rabbit meat and put it aside to cool, and sprinkled some chopped green onions and sesame seeds. After it cooled for a while, he took a knife and began to slice the meat and put it on a plate. The queen and others waited for Shen Shuwei to demonstrate. Shen Shuwei was not polite. She took the pancake and put it in her palm, put 2 pieces of rabbit meat on the pancake, brushed some hot sauce, then rolled it up, put it in her mouth and took a bite. The taste was more fragrant than roast duck. Qingying knew that the queen was hungry. After Shen Shuwei finished demonstrating, she took the pancake, put 2 pieces of roasted rabbit meat in it, spread some hot sauce on it, and handed it to the queen after rolling it up. "Queen, it's ready to eat." The queen had been greedy for a long time. She took it and took a bite impatiently, and found that the taste was better than she imagined. "This roasted rabbit meat is really fragrant." Qingying continued to roll the pancake. Concubine Su followed suit and praised it after eating it. While eating, Shen Shuwei did not forget to roll one for Chengzi. Chengzi was busy slicing meat and had no hands free. She finished it in 2 bites and was happy because her master would never forget her every time he ate. Shen Shuwei took a sip of tea and continued to roll meat with the pancake. Concubine Su said while eating, "Following the crown princess, delicious food is definitely indispensable." The queen nodded in agreement. "Concubine Su, I agree." Shen Shuwei stared at the rabbit skeleton while eating. It would be a pity to throw it away. Xiao Jinyu caught the rabbit and knew where to catch it quickly. A gray little rabbit might have lost its way, and was caught by Xiao Jinyu. Xiao Jinyu looked down at the furry little rabbit in his hand, walked back happily, and saw Wang Zhen walking towards him. "Why are you here?" "I have nothing to do, so I followed to see what Prince Yu is doing." Wang Zhen lowered her eyes to look at the little rabbit in Xiao Jinyu's hand, and exclaimed, "What a cute rabbit." Xiao Jinyu looked at the little rabbit in his hand with great pride. "Of course." Wang Zhen looked at Xiao Jinyu with expectation. "Prince Yu, can I hold the little rabbit?" Xiao Jinyu refused directly. "No, this is for Miss Han." Wang Zhen paused, looking at Xiao Jinyu's very serious eyes. unwillingly said, "I just want to hug." Xiao Jinyu still refused very straightforwardly, "If it's not for Miss Han, you can hug it, but if it's for Miss Han, others can't touch it." Wang Xin saw that Xiao Jinyu insisted, so she didn't force it. "Okay." On the way back, Wang Xin found that Xiao Jinyu walked very fast, and she couldn't keep up at all. She stared at the little rabbit in Xiao Jinyu's hand, and didn't notice the vines under her feet, and accidentally tripped to the ground. Ah! Xiao Jinyu turned around when he heard the sound and saw Wang Xin falling to the ground. She must have fallen hard, her eyes were red. He sighed, "She was so weak, why did she follow me? Wouldn't it delay my return time?" Xiao Jinyu had no choice but to walk back and squatted in front of Wang Xin. "Are you okay?" "It's okay, let's continue walking." Wang Xin sat up on the ground and rubbed her aching knees, tears hanging on her eyelashes. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The prince longs for me every night after mastering thought reading. Author, Gongzi Yun Si. Chapter 423. I'm fine. Wang Xin rubbed her aching knees and stood up. Seeing that she could stand up, Xiao Jinyu also stood up. Then let's go back. Miss Han might have been waiting for a long time. Yes, Wang Xin nodded obediently. Seeing that there was no problem, Xiao Jinyu retracted her gaze and continued to walk because she was anxious to give the little rabbit in her hand to Miss Han. Her steps were a little anxious. Wang Xin's knees hurt, and she walked slower than usual. She couldn't keep up with Xiao Jinyu's pace at all. After a while, she fell behind a lot. Xiao Jinyu's steps were anxious. As he walked, he thought that Wang Xin was a girl and should understand girls better, so he began to ask about girls' preferences. "Wang Xin, what do girls like?" "Miss Han is cold and indifferent. She usually reads books, waters flowers, etc., and I don't know her specific preferences." After waiting for a long time without seeing Wang Xin's answer, he looked sideways in confusion, but didn't see anyone. He looked behind him again, but still couldn't see Wang Xin. Where did they go? Xiao Jinyu looked up and found Wang Xin limping and walking slowly behind him. "It's better to stay in the tent." Xiao Jinyu walked back helplessly. Looking at her slow pace, although he was anxious, he couldn't leave her alone. "Are you seriously injured?" Wang Xin frowned and replied softly, "My knee hurts a little, especially when I walk." Xiao Jinyu guessed that she was in pain from her appearance. He comforted her, "If it hurts, then walk slower. I won't leave you alone." Wang Xin. Just like that, Xiao Jinyu accompanied the limping Wang Xin and slowly returned to the tent area. When they arrived at the door of the tent, Wang Xin was about to go in, but Xiao Jinyu suddenly stopped and stood right in front of her. "When you go back, let the imperial physician take a look at you, lest the wound is too serious. There is nothing for you to do here, just rest in peace." After Xiao Jinyu finished speaking, he lifted the curtain and walked in, leaving Wang Xin standing alone at the door of the tent. Wang Xin listened to Xiao Jinyu's words and couldn't understand Xiao Jinyu. He obviously cared about her, so why didn't he carry her back when her knee was injured? Is it because men and women should not be intimate? Then he asked her to see the imperial physician, fearing that the wound was serious. Why didn't he take her into the tent and ask the imperial physician to come and take a look? Xiao Jinyu is gentle and kind, why does it feel weird? Xiao Jinyu walked in happily with the little rabbit in his hand, and saw Miss Han sitting at the table reading a book, and he strode over. "Miss Han, look, I caught a rabbit." Miss Han put down the book in her hand and looked up at Xiao Jinyu, only to see that he looked excited, and then looked at the little rabbit in his hand. The little rabbit should have been born not long ago, and its fur is still fluffy. Xiao Jinyu put the little rabbit in front of her like a treasure, looking at her expectantly. "Do you like it?" Miss Han stretched out her slender fingers and poked the little rabbit's head. The little rabbit was trembling with fear and dared not move. She looked up at Xiao Jinyu. I like it very much. As long as you like it. Xiao Jinyu looked at the little rabbit happily. It will take a long time to grow to such a round size. He looked up at Miss Han and asked, are you hungry? Miss Han nodded, a little. I smelled the aroma of barbecue on the way back just now. Wait, I'll go find it and bring some back for you to eat. Xiao Jinyu went out happily. Miss Han looked down at the little rabbit in front of her and reached out to touch it. Shen Shuwei stared at the skeleton for a long time, and she smiled. Chengzi, cut the skeleton into pieces and fry them in the oil pan. Tao Liangyuan swallowed the rabbit meat in her mouth, and then asked, can this still be eaten? The queen looked over with curiosity. Crown Princess, what are you frying the skeleton for? Mother, you will know later. Shen Shuwei stood up and went to prepare the seasoning. After Chengzi cut the skeleton, he took the iron pan and put it on the fire, then poured oil on it and put the skeleton in to fry. When Xiao Jinyu came, he saw his mother and came over curiously. Mother, what are you eating? It smells so good. The queen saw her son coming and waved to him. Eat roasted rabbit meat, you come and eat some too. No wonder I smelled the fragrance. Xiao Jinyu came over and looked at the roasted rabbit meat, chili, and pancakes on the table. He turned his head and asked the queen, Mother, how do you eat this pancake? Mother, I'll teach you. The queen proudly picked up the pancake and put it on the plate in front of her, and then picked up 2 pieces of rabbit meat on it, spread some hot sauce, rolled it up, put it in her mouth, took a bite and ate it. Seeing this, Xiao Jinyu took some pancakes, picked up some roasted rabbit on the plate, and poured some hot sauce. When he was about to leave, he saw Chengzi fish out a pile of bones from the oil pan. Sister-in-law, what do you do with these bones? Eat it, or what do you think you do? Shen Shuwei said as she sprinkled the prepared seasonings into the bones, and then took chopsticks to stir it evenly, and you could smell a different fragrance from the roasted rabbit meat. After stirring evenly, Shen Shuwei poured the bones into the soup bowl. Xiao Jinyu saw it and felt a little greedy, so she picked up the empty plate and handed it over. Sister-in-law, give me some. Shen Shuwei poured all the remaining bones into the plate that Xiao Jinyu handed over. Thank you, sister-in-law. Xiao Jinyu happily turned around and walked towards the tent with the delicious food. The queen looked at her son's behavior and knew without asking that her son was eating it and giving it to Miss Han. It turned out that he knew how to love people after having a wife. No, it's not the wife. Shen Shuwei picked up a piece of bone and put it into her mouth to eat, and reminded the queen, Mother, try the taste of the salt and pepper skeleton. The queen saw that they all started eating, and when Xingying picked up a piece and put it in the bowl in front of her, she couldn't wait to pick it up and put it into her mouth to taste it. She found that the skeleton tasted so delicious after being fried and added with seasonings. In fact, this is the same as the method of Beijing roast duck. Beijing roast duck meat is eaten by rolling it with pancakes, soy sauce, scallions, and cucumbers. The roast duck skeleton can be fried into a salt and pepper skeleton, and the taste is also very delicious. Everyone ate and drank enough and returned to their tents with satisfaction. Shen Shuwei lay down on the couch when she returned to the tent. After eating and drinking enough, she was too lazy to move. When Xiao Jinyan came back from outside, he saw Shen Shuwei lying motionless on the couch. He walked over and sat down on the couch. Shen Shuwei heard the noise, opened her eyes, and saw Xiao Jinyan. She propped herself up and lay on her side to look at him. Your Highness, are you done? Xiao Jinyan looked at her slightly red face and nodded. Well, you didn't just wake up. Shen Shuwei shook her head. I woke up a long time ago, and just had a big meal with everyone. Xiao Jinyan then understood why she looked lazy and sleepy, because she was full. Will you go hunting with me tomorrow? Shen Shuwei yawned and said, I am not interested in riding and shooting, but I will cheer for your highness on the platform. Xiao Jinyan was also afraid that she would get hurt, so this would be a better way to solve the problem of worry. Well, as long as you are happy. Shen Shuwei suddenly remembered the hunting the year before last. She grabbed Xiao Jinyan's sleeve and asked, "No one wants to harm your highness this time, right?" Xiao Jinyan said, "You don't need to worry about these things. I will handle them." Shen Shuwei sat up and said very seriously, "How can I not worry? I don't want to be a widow." Xiao Jinyan. "Can't I just hope that he is well?" He held her hand tightly, looked at her steadily, and comforted her, "Don't think too much. I am not that weak, and my life cannot be taken away by anyone." Shen Shuwei nodded, "This is naturally the best." Xiao Jinyan, there is a bonfire party tonight. I will go to participate after I prepare. What attracted Shen Shuwei was not the bonfire party, but a lot of barbecues, all kinds of barbecues. The bonfire party was held as in previous years. The queen sat on the throne with the emperor. From this position, she could see everyone clearly. Shen Shuwei attended with Xiao Jinyan. Concubine Su and Tao Liangyuan were also there. This was their first time to participate, so they were inevitably very excited. Chengzi followed behind, and Qin Xiao happened to be there too. While everyone was listening to the emperor, Qin Xiao grabbed Chengzi's hand and left. Chengzi looked at Qin Xiao in confusion, and was forced to keep up with his pace. "What are you doing?" Qin Xiao grabbed Chengzi's wrist tightly and said, "I have something to say to you, it only takes a moment." Hearing this, Chengzi looked back at Shen Shuwei, and still followed Qin Xiao. Qin Xiao stopped when they were a little far away from the bonfire. Chengzi was so nervous that she didn't know what Qin Xiao would say. The prince longs for me every night after mastering thought reading. Author, Gongzi Yun Si. Chapter 424. Qin Xiao looked around carefully and made sure that no one was around. He lowered his eyes to look at Chengzi. With the help of the torch beside him, in the dark night, he could see that Chengzi was lowering her head at this time, as if she didn't want to pay attention to him. As the prince's close bodyguard, Qin Xiao really didn't know how to coax girls. His words and behavior were very straightforward, which made Chengzi unhappy. He scratched his head and saw the pearls and flowers in Chengzi's hair. He recognized it at a glance. This made Qin Xiao, who was in a tantrum, feel better. "Chengzi, I was too impulsive today. Don't be angry. I won't do it next time." Chengzi also felt that Qin Xiao's behavior today was inappropriate, but Qin Xiao's next words made her angry for several days. "Chengzi, just pretend you didn't hear what I said today." Chengzi raised her head and looked at Qin Xiao in confusion. Seeing his serious face, no, Qin Xiao usually looked like this, and he was very serious about every word he said. "What do you mean by that? What I said today was too frivolous and didn't take your feelings into consideration. Just treat me as a joke and let's be the same as before, okay?" Qin Xiao's tone was very serious, for fear that Chengzi wouldn't believe him. Chengzi's face turned from red to black. After explaining for a long time, she just wanted to say that what he said today was a joke and not to be taken seriously. "I know." Her voice was muffled. Qin Xiao asked again uncertainly, "Are you not angry?" Chengzi said unhappily, "Why should I be angry? It's just a joke. I didn't take it seriously." Qin Xiao stayed by the prince's side. He could immediately tell whether the prince was angry or not, just like Chengzi at this time, who seemed to be even angrier from the tone. "Why do I feel that you are still angry? I promise I won't say it anymore." "Don't be angry." Qin Xiao almost raised his hand to swear. Chengzi was so angry that she didn't want to talk to Qin Xiao anymore. "I have to go back to serve my master. I'm leaving first." After saying that, she turned around and left angrily. Qin Xiao scratched his head in annoyance. "Did I say the wrong thing again?" He sighed helplessly and followed. At this time, the bonfire party was in full swing. The tables formed a circle around several bonfires, and the princes and ministers sat around the bonfires, talking happily. The cook stood in the center and roasted various game, and the aroma was fragrant for a while. The queen smelled the aroma of the roasted meat. It was fragrant, but it didn't smell as good as the roasted rabbit meat she had eaten at the crown princess's place. Because Changzi roasted the rabbit with seasonings in advance, and then roasted it, and brushed it with oil when roasting to ensure that it was crispy on the outside and tender on the inside. The ancient seasonings cannot be compared with the modern seasonings that have evolved through the long river of history. The maid held the plate, and the chef sliced the meat and put it in it, and then the maid held it in front of the emperor and empress. The emperor picked up a piece of roasted wild robe meat with chopsticks and put it in the bowl in front of the queen, and said in a gentle voice, "It's rare for the queen to leave the palace. Try this freshly slaughtered and roasted wild game. It's a little different from the palace." The queen took a piece of roasted wild robe meat with chopsticks and put it in her mouth to taste it. The taste was not as good as the roasted rabbit meat she had in the afternoon, and it was not crispy on the outside and tender on the inside. The emperor picked up a few more pieces for the queen. "Eat more if you like it." In front of so many people, the queen couldn't offend the emperor, nodded, and continued to eat the roasted meat in the bowl. Here, the palace maid put the roasted wild robe meat in front of the prince. Xiao Jinyan was not keen on eating, but he knew that there was someone around him who was very keen on food, and he was staring at the plate of wild robe meat. Since the wild robe meat was roasted, Shen Shui's eyes have never left. She saw the palace maid bring the wild robe meat over with her own eyes. Now she watched Xiao Jinyan pick up the roasted wild robe meat in front of her and put it in front of her. Shen Shui brought her own condiments and pancakes. She put on disposable gloves and started to roll the barbecue meat to eat. Xiao Jinyan lowered his eyes and watched her eat. There were all kinds of novel things, including delicacies. It was the first time he saw pancakes with meat, which made him more curious about her previous identity. Shen Shui was happy eating, and her mouth would be sweeter. "Your Highness, I find that our tacit understanding is getting better and better. Now we have at least 60% tacit understanding." Xiao Jinyan heard Shen Shui explain that 100% means very good, which means full marks. 60%, so low? Why is it 60%? Shen Shui said, "Your Highness, 60% is not a small amount, it's already passed." Xiao Jinyan. Only when you are given food, you can feel the tacit understanding. Shen Shui said while eating roasted wild robe meat, "As long as your Highness continues to maintain it, after 10 or 20 years, the tacit understanding will definitely exceed 80%. Xiao Jinyan, after 10 or 20 years, it's only 100% and 80%. Shen Shui took the tea on the right hand and took a sip. "Your Highness, have you not heard the sentence, 'Treat me like a day for 10 years'? Xiao Jinyan nodded, "I have heard it. What does it have to do with tacit understanding?" Shen Shui explained, 10 years like a day, it means that our husband and wife are still in love, but your Highness was only 30 years old at that time, and there were so many temptations in the outside world, it was also very difficult for your Highness to remain the same. After 20, your Highness will be 40 years old, and a 40-year-old man is a flower, so it's a very high score to have 80 after this age." Xiao Jinyan asked, "Then when can I get full marks?" "Full marks, your Highness will definitely not like to hear it, so I won't say anything." Shen Shui rolled a piece of wild robe meat in a pancake and handed it to Xiao Jinyan. "Your Highness, try it, it tastes good." Xiao Jinyan rolled the meat with the pancake, took a bite, and chewed it carefully. It tasted really good. "I want to hear it." Shen Shui ate barbecue and was a little hesitant about Xiao Jinyan's questioning. There were some words that the future emperor was not willing to hear. The more Xiao Ju didn't want to say anything, the more Xiao Jinyan wanted to know. He continued to ask, You also said that we are husband and wife, so why can't you tell us? Shen Shuwei looked around, then held the table and leaned into Xiao Jinyan's ear and said, full marks, that's when we die. Emperors of all ages want to live long and live forever. Who is willing to listen to their own death? Xiao Jinyan was stunned when he heard this. Shen Shuwei looked at Xiao Jinyan's expression and knew that he was unhappy. She shrugged, His Highness insisted on concubine. You can't blame me for being angry. Xiao Jinyan said, I am not angry. Shen Chu breathed a sigh of relief, lowered his head and continued to eat the yepeaozi meat roll pancake with dipping sauce. Xiao Jinyan could now roughly guess how Xiaju arranged the 60-80-80 point score, and after careful analysis, he found it quite reasonable. When you die in good health, you should be buried together to be full marks. Xiao Jinyan thought that being consistent until the end of his life was a perfect score. Later, Xiao Jinyan discovered that it was not the consistent relationship that counted as a perfect score, but feeding him delicious food every day. If he did not feed him for one day, his tacit understanding would immediately result in a failure. To sum up, the relationship between the emperor and the empress needs delicious food to keep it fresh. After the bonfire party, Xiao Jinyan took Shen Shuwei back to the camp to rest. Shen Shuwei was lying on the couch after eating and drinking, too lazy to move. When she heard Xiao Jinyan asking Qin Xiao to prepare hot water, she looked at Xiao Jinyan's slender figure, and her narrow waist showed off her slim waist. Shen Shuwei looked at it, then turned sideways, sitting in a leisurely manner, waiting for the beauty to take off her clothes, and also watched the beauty take a bath. Xiao Jinyan came to the table, picked up the teapot, poured himself a cup of tea, and took a few sips to relieve the greasiness. As a martial arts student, he quickly noticed a pair of eyes staring at him with eagerness. He raised his eyes and glanced over, and saw the person on the couch staring at him unblinkingly, with such a greedy look that even made him greedy. Xiaju. Shen Shuwei was caught in a trance when she was watching. She blinked her beautiful eyes twice with a guilty conscience. Your Highness, is something okay? Xiao Jinyan put down the teacup in his hand and quietly ordered, come and undress me. Shen Shuwei was so full now that she didn't want to move at all. She said in a coquettish tone, Your Highness, I am not feeling well right now. Can you please undress yourself? Xiao Jinyan stepped over and stood in front of the couch, looking at Xiaoju who was swinging his legs leisurely. You are becoming more and more courageous now. I can't control you anymore, right? Shen Chu blinked his beautiful big eyes twice and began to change the subject. Your Highness, I miss the babies. I don't know if they are asleep at this time. Xiao Jinyan. Shen Chu sighed slightly. Susu is a clingy little girl, won't you get used to it without me around? Xiao Jinyan directly ignored Shen Shuwei's words. He leaned over and held the couch with one hand, looking at her intently with his gleaming phoenix eyes. Don't you want to undress me? Your Highness, of course I am willing, but I am too full to get up. She wanted to see the beauty take off her clothes even more. Xiao Jinyan nodded thoughtfully. In that case, I will help you digest your food later. Shen Chu nodded in agreement without even thinking, okay. An imperceptible smile flashed in Xiao Jinyan's eyes. He stood up straight and brought his hands to his waist. His slender fingers easily untied the girdle and put it on the hanger nearby. Then he untied the belt of his coat, took off his coat and put it on the clothes hanger. On a hanger. Next is the middle coat underneath. When the belt is untied, the strong chest muscles are revealed. Xiao Jinyan kept looking at Xiaoju while undressing, and found that her eyes were always staring at him, or to be precise, at his figure. That look was even more lustful than before. He hummed softly, then slowly leaned over with his clothes open. Shen Shuwei, who was watching in ecstasy, saw the beautiful scenery in front of him gradually enlarging, and he raised his head after realizing it, and happened to run into a pair of gleaming phoenix eyes, as if he was trapped in them. It is said that peach blossom eyes are alluring, but who can understand the extent of being bewitched by being stared at by a pair of phoenix eyes? Xiao Jinyan asked in a low voice, want to see it more clearly. Shen Shuwei nodded as if he was bewitched, I think so. Xiao Jinyan quietly took off his shirt to reveal his perfect figure, and then threw the shirt to the ground. Seeing her staring at it without blinking, he continued to ask, want to touch it? The prince longs for me every night after mastering thought reading. Author, Gongzi Yun Si. Chapter 425. When Xiao Jinyan came closer, there was a cold fragrance unique to men that surrounded the tip of her nose, making her a little dizzy. In addition, his voice was originally very nice, but after deliberately lowering it, it became even more fatally seductive. Shen Shuwei looked at the well-proportioned chest muscles in front of him, with clear and smooth texture lines. As a half-art student, he had an inquiring and appreciative eye for beautiful men's figures. She had seen it countless times, but every time she saw it, she felt that it would be a pity not to become a model with this figure. Shen Shuwei thought in her mind that she shouldn't be sour, but she didn't control her hand that was ready to move. Slender fingers caressed the strong abdominal muscles, which felt firm and tough. There was a faint hint of sweat on them, which must have been due to the close proximity to the campfire. Xiao Jinyan held the bed with both hands and lowered his eyes as she carefully put her hand over her, with a lustful look that made his eyes darken. Shen Chu touched her slightly and found Xiao Jinyan looking down at her, her husband, what's wrong with her touch? If you have a husband like this, what else can I ask for? Xiao Jinyan laughed inaudibly, Xiaoju. Shen Chu slightly raised his head and looked at Xiao Jinyan, and found that they were very close to each other, and the cold fragrance on the tip of his nose became stronger and stronger. Xiao Jinyan lifted her chin with his slender fingers, lowered his head and kissed her lips. At this time, an inappropriate voice came from outside the door, Master, the hot water is ready. Xiao Jinyan's face turned black. Shen Shuwei saw it and couldn't help laughing. Xiao Jinyan, you are still smiling. Shen Shuwei suppressed a smile and said, Your Highness, I was wrong. You should go take a bath. Together Xiao Jinyan said, picked her up and turned towards the screen. Before Shen Shuwei could react, she was picked up by Xiao Jinyan, strode to the screen and put her on a chair. As soon as she sat down, she saw Xiao Jinyan's hand reaching over and starting to untie her clothes. Having taken off my hands countless times, I am already familiar with the road. He took off his clothes one by one and threw them all on the ground without mercy. Shen Shuwei looked at the clothes on the ground. They were still new. She only wore them once today. It was too arrogant to throw them away like this. When you sit in the tub, you are surrounded by warm water, which relieves you from the fatigue of the day. Your Highness, isn't this good? We haven't tried it here yet. Shen Chu slightly raised his head to look at Xiao Jinyan, stretched out his fair and slender arms around his neck, and said close to his ear, the tent is not soundproof, it would be bad for others to hear. Xiao Jinyan's eyes paused, and then he chuckled, the guards at the door have already heard what you said. Qin Xiao standing at the door of the camp was ashamed. Shen Shuwei blushed when he heard this. Suo's ear is really extraordinary. She said coquettishly, that's even worse. Xiao Jinyan said, if you don't want them to hear it, what's the problem? Shen Chu snorted slightly, isn't this difficult? We can't let them plug their ears, right? Xiao Jinyan did not explain, but ordered in a cold voice, go further away. I obey, Qin Xiao told the guards standing around, stay away. Shen Shuwei was petrified on the spot. Is this okay? Xiao Jinyan asked, is it okay now? Shen Shuwei refused directly, no, they all know it. Xiao Jinyan only gave her 2 words, it's too late. In a daze, he heard Xiao Jinyan say in a hoarse voice, Xiaju, the look in your eyes just now made me hungry. Shen Shuwei was confused. What did she just do to make Xiao Jinyan so greedy? At this time, Xiao Jinyu took some mosquito-repellent medicine from the imperial doctor and placed it in the tent. The besieged city is a huge forest with the most mosquitoes and the most poisonous ones. After putting away the mosquito repellent, Xiao Jinyu came to the bed and sat down, looking at Miss Han's legs. Her legs were really long and white, but they were bitten by bugs a few times. They were red and heartbreaking. He did. I've sprinkled repellent. There won't be any mosquitoes in a while. I'll put some on you. Xiao Jinyu said, took out a bottle of medicine from his arms, opened the cap, and applied a little ointment to the red and swollen area. Miss Han lowered her eyes and looked at him with a distressed look on his face. She didn't know but thought she had been seriously injured. It's just a few bags, just a little itchy, not painful. The itch is already very uncomfortable, what if the pain is still there? Xiao Jinyu looked at the bags, which had not gone away. He looked at the medicine in his hand. This medicine is not effective at all, it is still red and swollen. Miss Han. No matter how good the ointment is, the effect is not that fast. Miss Han is right, I was too anxious. Xiao Jinyu put the medicine on the table. Miss Han pushed his arm and urged, go take a bath quickly. It's time to rest. Yes, Xiao Jinyu got up and went to take a bath. Hot water had been prepared a long time ago. When Xiao Jinyu came out of the bath, he found that there were still mosquitoes in the tent because Miss Han was bitten by mosquitoes again. This anthelmintic medicine is useless, and the doctor doesn't know what to eat. Miss Han looked at Xiao Jinyu frowning and was about to speak when her arm was suddenly bitten by a mosquito. She smacked it hard and looked down at the palm of her hand. In addition to the mosquito, there was blood. Xiao Jinyu saw it, grabbed her arm, and saw another red and swollen bump on her fair arm, which made her feel very distressed. You wait, I'll go find the prince brother. After Xiao Jinyu finished speaking, he stood up and walked out with long strides. When Miss Han wanted to stop him, he had already disappeared from the door. The distance between the two tents is not far, just a few steps away. Xiao Jinyu saw that the light was still on in the tent, so he knew that the prince brother was still awake, and he strode over. In the tent. Your Highness is getting less and less concerned about me, and you won't let me rest so late, Shen Shuwei complained dissatisfiedly. I said I would help you digest your food, and I did it. Xiao Jinyu's forehead was covered with sweat, but his movements did not stop at all. Prince brother, I have something to ask you. The sudden shout made Xiao Jinyu frown. Why are you not sleeping at this time and coming to my tent? Shen Shuwei held her breath, but she remembered that Xiao Jinyu had also learned martial arts, and she would definitely hear the voices in the tent. Xiao Jinyu impatiently spit out two words, wait. Xiao Jinyu waited in the tent for a cup of tea, and when he saw that the prince brother didn't let him in, he couldn't help but feel anxious. My brother is too slow in getting dressed, isn't he? Qin Xiao. It's good that the master didn't scold me, but he still complained about it being slow. After another cup of tea, Xiao Jinyu came out of the tent dressed neatly. Seeing Xiao Jinyu, he asked coldly, what's the matter? Xiao Jinyu didn't notice that his brother looked bad. He was only thinking about Miss Han being harassed by mosquitoes. Brother, do you have any insect repellent here? There are a lot of mosquitoes in my tent, and Miss Han has a lot of bites. I'll go in and get it. Xiao Jinyu's tone was obviously bad. Xiao Jinyu still didn't notice that his brother was in a bad mood. Xiao Jinyu took some insect repellent, which was prepared by Shen Shuwei and was very effective. Light it up and put it under the bed. I know, brother. Xiao Jinyu took the insect repellent and turned to leave. After a few steps, he thought of the several red packets on Miss Han's legs and turned back. Brother, do you have any anti-itching ointment? Miss Han's legs were bitten by mosquitoes and it's itchy. Xiao Jinyu. There is indeed an anti-itching ointment, which is also prepared by Shen Shuwei and has a very good anti-itching effect. When he went to get the certificate last year, Shen Shuwei prepared a lot of such products for him. When Xiao Jinyu got the anti-itch ointment, he happily returned to his tent. After leaving for a while, he found that Miss Han was bitten a few more times. Xiao Jinyu was so distressed that he said, "I got the anthelmintic from the prince brother, I will apply it now." Miss Han frowned and scratched the place where the mosquitoes had bitten her. In serious cases, the skin was scratched. After applying the anthelmintic, Xiao Jinyu sat down on the bed with the anti-itch ointment. Seeing her fair skin being scratched and bleeding, he regretted bringing her here. He applied some ointment and gently smeared it on the place where she was bitten. Looking at her long white legs, he began to have two thoughts. Since that drunken time, he vaguely remembered some fragments. Whenever he thought of them, he blushed and his heart beat fast, and he was also very excited. His eyes subconsciously moved upwards. Miss Han noticed that Xiao Jinyu's eyes were erratic, so she asked, "Prince Yu, what are you looking at?" Xiao Jinyu retracted her eyes guiltily, "Maybe you smell so good that even mosquitoes want to bite you." Because no mosquitoes bite him, they all bite Miss Han. If they all bite him, Miss Han won't have to suffer. Miss Han smiled when she heard this. "This is the first time I heard that mosquitoes still bite people for smelling good." She looked down at the place where the ointment was applied, and was a little surprised. "This ointment works very well, it doesn't itch anymore." The things that the prince brother has are naturally the best. Xiao Jinyu was quite proud. Fortunately, he went to find the prince brother, otherwise if he went to find the imperial physician, Miss Han would have to continue to suffer. After Xiao Jinyu applied the ointment, he took off his clothes and went to bed, and the buzzing of mosquitoes in his ears disappeared. He turned his head to look at Miss Han. "Have you noticed that there are fewer insects?" "Indeed, there are fewer insects, and no mosquitoes bite me anymore." Miss Han found that the insect repellent was effective. At first, she was worried that she would not sleep well tonight. Xiao Jinyu stretched out his arms and hugged her into his arms. He closed his eyes, and his mind was filled with Miss Han's long, white, and tender legs, plus those exciting clips after being drunk, so he couldn't fall asleep. "Miss Han, are you sleeping? You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The prince longs for me every night after mastering thought reading." Author, Gongzi Yun Si. Chapter 426. Miss Han shook her head, "No." When Xiao Jinyu heard this, he was even more excited and couldn't sleep. He whispered into her ear, "Turn around." Okay. After hearing this, Miss Han turned and looked at Xiao Jinyu. She saw that his fair cheeks were a little red, so she stretched out her hand to reach her forehead. The temperature was normal. Xiao Jinyu grabbed Miss Han's hand, looked at Miss Han's beautiful face, and his eyes were a little hot. "Miss Han." Miss Han seemed to know what Xiao Jinyu was thinking. She took the initiative to put her arms around his neck. "Prince Yu's face is very hot." Xiao Jinyu explained with some guilt, "I am hot." Miss Han smiled lowly and did not expose his words. Instead, she came closer to him and kissed his lips. Xiao Jinyu was originally too excited to sleep, but now Miss Han took the initiative to kiss him, which made him lose all his remaining self-control. Asterisk. Shen Shuwei looked at Xiao Jinyan, who had a dark face, and knew exactly how he felt after being interrupted. "Your Highness, let's rest." Xiao Jinyan looked at Shen Shuwei with some resentment. "I haven't had enough fun yet." Anyone who was interrupted at the critical moment would not be able to help but swear. Shen Shuwei dragged his heavy body up, put his arms around Xiao Jinyan's neck, and asked, "What should I do if your highness gives me a concubine?" Xiao Jinyan picked up the person. Shen Shuwei's weight was so light for him that he could pick him up easily. Again. Shen Shuwei. The reason for co-writing is to torment me again. Early the next morning. Shen Shuwei put on her clothes and looked at the prince who was sitting at the table and drinking tea calmly. She walked over and asked curiously, "Your Highness, why don't you wear soft hedgehog armor?" Xiao Jinyan stopped drinking tea and asked in confusion, "What is soft hedgehog armor?" Shen Shuwei explained, "It is a treasure that can be invulnerable when worn on the body." Xiao Jinyan shook his head, "I haven't heard of it." Okay, Shen Shuwei felt that she had watched too many TV series. How could there be soft hedgehog armor in ancient times? After breakfast, Shen Shuwei followed Xiao Jinyan to the hunting gathering place. When they arrived, other princes and ministers also arrived one after another. The queen also wore a riding outfit today. The red riding outfit was exquisitely made, and you could tell at a glance that she was interested in it. The queen puts on a riding costume and has a different mood. She has not been riding a horse for a long time, and she is looking forward to the hunt. The emperor also wore riding clothes. The purpose was to go hunting with the queen and regain the previous feeling. "Queen, you look good in riding clothes. You feel much younger." "Queen, wouldn't you be young if you don't wear riding clothes?" How did the emperor know that he just wanted to praise the queen, but it ended up being self-defeating? Shen Shuwei was not interested in hunting. She sat at the table and ate grapes with concubine Su and Tao Liangyuan. It was not until Xiao Jinyan rode off to hunt that she took out her handkerchief and waved to Xiao Jinyan. "Come on, Your Highness, I'm waiting for you to make a triumphant return." Xiao Jinyan looked back at the audience and saw Shen Chu waving a small pink handkerchief. He didn't expect that she would really wave and cheer for him. He shook his head helplessly, withdrew his gaze and climbed onto the tall horse. Xiao Jinyu felt that Miss Han was a little worried about being alone. "Miss Han, if you feel bored, you can chat with your sister-in-law. I will go hunting and won't be back for a while." Miss Han comforted her, "You can go there in peace, I'll be fine by myself." Xiao Jinyu said again, "Then you wait for me to come back." Miss Han nodded, "Yes." Xiao Jinyu then safely mounted his tall horse and prepared to set off. Wan Xian, who was sitting aside, was a little hurt when she saw this scene. Xiao Jinyu didn't even notice her sitting here. After Xiao Jinyu left, she looked at the Han girl. The first thing she noticed was that she was very tall and beautiful. After thinking about it, he stood up and sat over, taking the initiative to say hello. "Miss Han, I am Wan Xian, nice to meet you." Wan Xian's voice is so soft that anyone who listens to it will put down their guard. Miss Han glanced at Wan Xian and said in a cold and distant voice, "Are we familiar?" Wan Xian smiled lowly, "It doesn't matter if we don't know each other the first time we meet. We'll get to know each other the second time we meet. I find it quite boring to be alone, so I came here to disturb you when I saw you were alone. Do you mind?" Miss Han's voice was still light, "Whatever, I'm not in the mood to chat." Wan Xian's face was stiff. She looked at Miss Han and she looked young. Why did she speak so coldly? Led by the emperor and empress, the princes and ministers all rode towards the forest in front of them. Once the hunters left, what was left behind were the women and the weak-spoken officials. The officials sat together and drank wine, drank tea, and talked freely. Wan Xian saw that Miss Han was only focused on drinking tea. She held the teacup and asked carefully, "Does Miss Han know about the Queen Mother's proposed marriage?" Miss Han stopped drinking her tea and looked at Wan Xian doubtfully, "What do you mean?" Wan Xian saw that she had reacted, and then Nyanyo continued, "The Queen Mother proposed the marriage of a civilian girl to King Yu. A civilian girl has no father or mother, and is taken by the Queen Mother. Naturally, she has to listen to the Queen Mother. The civilian girls also have to listen to the Queen Mother. I heard that King Yu is going to marry Miss Han." Wan Xian said and then asked cautiously, "I don't know whether Miss Han likes me or not. I hope Miss Han will forgive me if I am rude." When Miss Han heard that the Queen Mother was planning to get married, her face looked a little ugly. Xiao Jinyu never mentioned this matter to her. Don't know? Or did you not mention it on purpose? Seeing that Miss Han didn't speak, Wan Xian asked suspiciously, don't Miss Han know about this? The emperor has informed King Yu, and the daughter of the people also heard the queen mother mention it. The specific matter is not clear to the daughter of the people. Miss Han looked at Wan Xian coldly, why are you telling me this? Wan Xian said softly, the common girl and Miss Han don't know each other. In order to get along harmoniously, they took the initiative to talk to each other and get to know each other. In this way, we can serve King Yu wholeheartedly in the future. Miss Han said coldly, I will not share the same husband with others. Wan Xian looked at Miss Han in surprise, what does Miss Han mean? Miss Han also made it clear, if you want to marry Prince Yu, it's impossible. Wan Xian was startled when she heard the words, and then sighed helplessly, it's normal for a man to have 3 wives and 4 concubines. Miss Han, please don't get into trouble. I'm not here to demonstrate to Miss Han, but I want to join in nicely. Let's only by being good sisters can we serve King Yu better. Miss Han snorted, I don't care what your purpose is, King Yu will not marry you. Wan Xian was stunned for a moment, and did not continue to speak. She lowered her head and drank the tea in her hand. Miss Han put it on the teacup and picked up the shivering little rabbit beside her. The little rabbit was frightened and kept shrinking, not daring to move. Wan Xian saw the little rabbit in Miss Han's arms, the same one Xiao Jinyu caught yesterday. It seems that King Yu is very kind to Miss Han, and even catches rabbits for her to play with. Asterisk. In order not to get bored, Shen Shuwei brought a lot of snacks, and several people sat around the table, cracking melon seeds and chatting. Concubine Su said with dark circles under her eyes, I didn't sleep well last night, and I felt a little uncomfortable with my bed. Me too, the bed here is so hard, not as comfortable as in the palace, and my back still hurts. Tao Liangyuan knocked on the seeds skillfully. After they finished speaking, they both looked at Shen Shuwei and found that she also had dark circles under her eyes. Princess, you didn't sleep last night either, okay. Shen Chu took a sip of melon seeds for a moment, thinking of a certain man who tormented her in all kinds of ways last night and wouldn't let her go even when she fell asleep, causing her not to sleep well. Well, Tao Liangyuan is right. The bed was so hard that my waist turned blue. After Shen Shuwei finished speaking, she stuffed a melon seed into her mouth. She did not lie to the little sisters. Her waist was indeed blue. Concubine Su was stunned, I thought the princess's bed would be better than ours, but I didn't expect it to be so bad. Tao Liangyuan guessed, maybe it's because we can't stay for a few days, so the bed is a bit bad. Shen Chu nodded vigorously with no conscience, what Tao Liangyuan said makes sense. In fact, the bed she slept on was quite soft and she slept very comfortably. Of course, it was only comfortable when Xiao Jinyan didn't torment her. Maybe it's because of the prince's favor? Concubine Su suggested, how about we play cards? Tao Liangyuan also agreed, just have fun, otherwise it will be too boring. Shen Shuwei actually wanted to lie down and sleep, so he simply suggested, you don't need 4 people to play cards, 2 people can also play. With Shen Shuwei's unremitting efforts, Su Fangfei and Tao Liangyuan learned the cards they played, the simplest kitten fishing. Concubine Su was excited to play at first, but after playing for a while she felt bored. Wait a minute, I'll go and take a moment first. After Concubine Su said that, she picked up her skirt and left. Gong's room was a bit far away, so she walked for a while before arriving. After the physical problem was solved, Concubine Su often walked back. Before she could take a few steps, someone covered her mouth from behind and dragged her behind a tree. The prince longs for me every night after mastering thought reading. Author, Gong Ziyun Si. Chapter 427. Chapter 427. Isn't it appropriate to give love gifts upon meeting? Is Feng Wu's disappearance related to Xiao Jinyan? Concubine Su's eyes widened, and she slapped the person with her hands desperately, and at the same time kicked the person behind her with her feet. However, the person behind her was very strong, so these actions were in vain. She watched helplessly as she was dragged into the woods not far away. Her mouth was tightly covered by a big hand, and she couldn't even make a sound for help. The despair of facing extreme danger made her terrified. She wailed in her heart, it was over, she would definitely die this time, and she might not be able to keep her virginity. It's a rare occasion to go out and play, so unlucky. Oh my God, my little girl's life is too short. After entering the woods, the sun and light were blocked, giving me a sense of coolness. But Concubine Su was sweating profusely and was obviously frightened. Just when Concubine Su was about to finish, the person behind her suddenly let go of her. Concubine Su opened her eyes wide. How long will it take if she doesn't run away now? The moment she let go, Concubine Su ran away, but she didn't notice the hem of the skirt under her feet. She stepped on it, only to hear an exclamation. Ah! Concubine Su saw that she was about to fall down, and she was wailing in her heart. Did she not read the almanac today? All bad things happened to her. Just when Concubine Su was about to fall, a long and powerful arm hugged her waist, easily saving her from the tragic fall. Concubine Su looked at the ground less than a foot away from her. She was so scared that she burst into tears. The ground was covered with wildflowers, and a thorny wildflower was poking her forehead. Didn't he fall into the thorny grass at that speed and be disfigured? Why are you running? The familiar voice above her head made Concubine Su stunned for a moment. Isn't this the man in black? At this moment, the person behind her pulled her up, allowing Concubine Su to see the visitor's true face in Lushan. He was still wearing night clothes and a black face scarf. When she saw the familiar man in black, Concubine Su felt happy and angry at the same time. You scared me to death just now, do you know? The man in black saw her bursting into tears, as if someone had bullied her. Are you so timid? Anyone else would be scared if they were suddenly kidnapped. You covered my mouth, and I thought I was going to be tortured and killed. Concubine Su read the storybook yesterday, and there was a story about a girl who was kidnapped, tortured, and killed. It's so miserable. Girls should be vigilant when going out, you don't know how bad the bad guys can be. The man in black also realized that his actions had misunderstood her. If you don't cover your mouth, you can hear everything with your voice. Concubine Su was stunned when she heard this. It seemed like this was the case. People would scream when they were scared. Then you can't appear in front of me. Wouldn't I stop barking when I see you? Every time I'm attacked suddenly from behind, I'm lucky if I'm not scared to death by you. After hearing this, the man in black thought it made sense, but he just thought that he had entered illegally. Wouldn't it be too arrogant to be upright? Then we have to alert the Imperial Guards. Concubine Su thought about the identity of the man in black. Well, she actually didn't know the identity of the man in black, but entering the palace for the first time wearing night clothes was a capital offense. Now entering and leaving the royal enclosure is equivalent to an assassin, which is also a capital offense. Why do you always wear night clothes? Convenient. Concubine Su stared in front of her with two beautiful eyes. She was dressed in black. She didn't look like a good person. She suddenly thought of a possibility and couldn't help but widen her eyes. Are you an assassin in an organization? Man in black, no. Oh, Concubine Su felt that she must have read too many stories to think that the man in black was an assassin. Assassins are very cold-blooded. If the man in black were an assassin, she would have died 800 times. The man in black took out a small accessory from his arms and handed it to Concubine Su. This is for you. Concubine Su looked at the small pendant with a bell in his broad palm. She took it over and looked at it several times, then shook the yaw out of curiosity, but there was no sound. She raised her head and looked at the man in black in confusion. Why doesn't the bell ring? It's not a bell, there's a goo worm inside. The thing that concubine Sue was most afraid of was bugs. When the man in black said they were bugs, she was so frightened that she threw the bugs away in her hand. The man in black quickly caught the bell that was thrown away by concubine Sue. Concubine Sue still has lingering fears. What's not good for you to give? What kind of goo worms are you giving? Seeing that she was so frightened, the man in black patiently explained, this voodoo is harmless, it just senses its owner. Concubine Sue was still a little scared, staring at the bell-like thing in his hand. Who would have thought that there was a poisonous insect inside? Is it poisonous? Does it bite? The man in black said, it is not poisonous and does not bite. Its only function is to scream. Concubine Sue felt a lot more relieved after hearing this. She stared at the goo worm in his hand for a long time. She could not see the goo worm, but could only see the golden bell. The worm should be inside. What's your name? The man in black handed the bell to her. Take it. Concubine Sue was still a little scared when she thought there were goo insects inside. After hesitating for a while, she slowly stretched out her hand and picked up the bell in his hand. As soon as she got a hold of it, she saw the man in black suddenly leaving. By the time she realized what she was doing, he was already gone. Every time, I just come and leave. Concubine Sue was a little dissatisfied. She looked down at the small bell in her hand. It was tied with a red rope. Not to mention it was quite pretty. When Concubine Sue was holding the bell and was about to leave, she suddenly heard two crisp sounds, and at the same time, the bell in her palm also beat twice. She raised the bell in her hand, watched it beat again in her hand, and heard a crisp sound at the same time. Before she could understand what was going on, a black figure suddenly flashed in front of her. She raised her head suddenly and saw the man in black standing straight in front of her. The man in black asked, "Did you hear that?" Only then did Concubine Sue realize that the man in black suddenly left, in order to let her hear the cries of the goo insects. She thought he had left without saying goodbye. She looked surprised. I heard it, it not only barks but also jumps. The man in black said, as soon as I come here in the future, you will know. Concubine Sue looked down at the goo worm in her hand. She thought the goo worm was a bit scary before, but now she feels it is cute, barks and jumps. She also knows that the man in black is coming, and the man in black will not scare him again next time. She did. The man in black looked down at her, then looked at the little bell in her hand, and didn't know why he gave it to her. This sensing goo is not that easy to get. It was given to him by a friend he met while passing through Meow territory a few years ago. It is difficult to make induction goo, so it is extremely rare. The induction goo is called little bell because it looks like a bell and its sound is as clear as a bell. Concubine Sue tied the small bell to herself, and after making sure it wouldn't fall off, she raised her head and looked at the man in black. By the way, don't you live in the capital? The man in black asked, how do you know? You often show up once every few months, sometimes every month or two. If you live in the capital, you shouldn't show up once every so long, right? Concubine Sue thought about this and asked again, that xiaoju of yours, did you find it? No, the man in black sighed, it's like finding a needle in a haystack, how easy is it? Concubine Sue asked again, then how do you know that xiaoju may appear in Daxia's palace? The man in black paused when he heard this. Naturally it was because of Xiao Jinyan, the prince of Daxia. At the same time, Tao Yangyuan reviewed the cards several times, but she couldn't help but feel a little worried when she didn't see Concubine Sue coming back. She looked at Shen Shuwei and saw that she was asleep, so she stretched out her hand to shake her awake. Princess, Concubine Sue has been in the palace for a while, why haven't you come back yet? Could something have happened? Shen Shuwei was a little drowsy now. After being shaken awake, she was still a little confused. After hearing Tao Lianjiayuan's words, she immediately sobered up a little. Let's go look for it. Okay, Tao Lianyuan put down the cards in her hand and followed Shen Chuwei towards Gongfang. Gong's house is not very far, you can reach it in a short walk. Shen Chuwei and Tao Lianyuan opened several doors, but they didn't see Concubine Su, but they were frightened. Tao Lianyuan grabbed Shen Chuwei's hand and said worriedly, Concubine Su is here for the first time. It's impossible for her to run around casually. Shen Chuwei guessed, could it be that he saw a rabbit or a pheasant or something, and wanted to catch it, but he ran away with it. The two looked at each other and began to call people anxiously. Concubine Su, where are you? Concubine Su, come out quickly. Shen Chu turned slightly and said to Chun 11, it will be faster if you go find Guard Qin and ask him to bring someone to find him. My slave nose Chengzi also knew the seriousness of the matter, so she turned around and ran back. Seeing Qin Xiao from a distance, she ran over in one breath. Qin Xiao, it's bad, Concubine Su is missing. Qin Xiao was very happy to see Chun 11 coming to him. After listening to what she said, he realized that there was something important. Where did Concubine Su disappear? Chengzi took a few breaths and said, Concubine Su went to the courtroom for a long time and didn't return, so she discovered that she was missing. Qin Xiao said, I will take people to find her now. Tell the princess not to be anxious. Chengzi nodded, yeah. Qin Xiao called 20 guards and started looking for people around Gongfang Wei. Concubine Su, where are you? Concubine Su, come out quickly. Concubine Su had long forgotten how long she had been out. It was not until she heard Shen Chuwei and Tao Lianyuan calling her that she realized that she had come out to pay respects. They must have been worried after not going back for so long. She raised her head and looked at the man in black. She wanted to ask his name several times, but she never had the right chance to ask. It's time for me to go back, it's time for them to worry about me. The man in black nodded, yeah. Concubine Su clenched the small bell in her hand, glanced at the man in black, turned around and ran in the direction she came from. Shen Chuwei saw Concubine Su running towards the side and was so excited, Concubine Su, where have you been? Tao Lianyuan breathed a sigh of relief, you suddenly disappeared, which scared us to death. Concubine Su felt a little guilty, and she felt a little guilty when she saw them worrying about her. I saw a very cute little rabbit. I haven't chased it for a long time, which makes you worried. Shen Chuwei looked at Concubine Su up and down and breathed a sigh of relief when he didn't see her injured. It's good that she's fine. Let's go back. The group of people walked back happily. The man in black walked out from behind the tree and looked at the leaving figure of the crown princess, with some doubts flashing in his eyes. Just as he was about to leave, he saw a cat appearing not far away. The cat was all white, and its blue eyes were staring at him unblinkingly. The man in black was just stunned for a moment, then strode towards the cat, bent down and picked it up. Strangely, Sichuan, who always hated being held by others, unexpectedly did not struggle this time, nor did he open his claws to scratch people. The prince longs for me every night after mastering thought reading. Author, Gongzi Yun Si. Chapter 428. Xuetuan let the man in black hold him, raising his furry head and staring at the man in black, as if he was curious. The man in black lowered his eyes and looked at the cat in his arms. It was all white and had blue eyes. The more he looked at it, the more it looked like the pet Xiaoju had raised, only it was much larger. If it is Xiaoju's pet, does it mean that Xiaoju is not only safe, but may also be here? There was no clue about Xiaoju for a long time, which rekindled hope in the frustrated heart of the man in black. The man in black hugged the cat and couldn't wait to find someone. At this time, deep in the forest, a vigorous figure quickly rushed towards the side. When Chu Zhao saw his master, he stepped forward and held his fist in front of him. "Master, what are you doing here?" When the man in black saw his subordinate coming down, he happily raised the cat in his hand and said, "Do you think this cat is very similar to Xiaoju's pet?" Chu Zhao looked at the cat in his master's arms carefully and carefully. "It looks like a cat, but this one is too big. He can be a father." Before he finished speaking, the man in black gave him a violent blow. "After all these years, can't it grow?" Hearing this, Chu Zhao immediately nodded and admitted his mistake. "What the master said makes sense, but my subordinates didn't think far enough." Sichuan looked at the two masters and servants in front of him with a confused expression. "By the way, is it time to send me home?" The man in black looked down at the cat in his arms, then raised his head and said to Chu Zhao, "I'm going to find someone." Chu Zhao asked in confusion, "Where can I find someone?" The man in black ignored Chu Zhao, hugged the cat and left conveniently. Chu Zhao sighed, "Who are you looking for?" In the past 2 years, the palace had gone to the palace AncientTimes but could not find anyone. Instead, it often looked for concubine Su. She is a married woman. He didn't dare to say these words in front of his master for fear of getting beaten. The sun, which was approaching noon, was stronger than that in the morning. After walking for a while, I was sweating all over. Shen Shuwei and others also returned to change seats and sat down. They had a false alarm and drank tea together to calm down their shock. When Qin Xiao learned that concubine Su was back safely, he asked the guards who were looking for concubine Su to come back. As a precaution, Qin Xiao asked the guards to stay nearby to avoid the unexpected situation happening again. Shen Shuwei picked up a banana, peeled it and handed it to concubine Su. "Eat a banana to calm down the shock." Concubine Su was also hungry now, so she took the banana and put it in her mouth and took a bite. Tao Lianyuan picked up the teapot, poured a cup of tea and handed it to concubine Su. "Here, drink some tea." Concubine Su held a teacup in one hand and a banana in the other. She drank some tea to moisten her throat, and then took a bite of the banana to satisfy her hunger. "Do you want to ride a horse?" Shen Chu shook his head slightly. "My butt hurts when I ride a horse. I don't want to ride a horse." After hearing this, concubine Su looked at Tao Lianyuan. Tao Lianyuan shook her head. "I can't ride a horse, and I'm too lazy to learn." "Okay, I actually want to ride a horse," concubine Su said and took a bite of the banana. "Let's ride again tomorrow. Your Majesty and the others should be back soon. We can have barbecue when they get back." Shen Shuwei became excited after saying that. Xiao Jinyan would definitely hunt back a lot of prey. The most indispensable thing in the mountains and forests is game. When they heard about roasted game, concubine Su and Tao Lianjiayuan's eyes lit up. "The imperial chef in the palace can't bake as delicious as Chengzi," concubine Su whispered. Tao Lianyuan echoed, "I think so too." Shen Shuwei also felt that the meat roasted by the imperial chef was a little bit interesting. She thought for a while and said, "When His Highness comes back, we can roast it ourselves." Concubine Su raised her hand in agreement. "What a good idea." Tao Lianyuan glanced at Miss Han and Wan Xian who were not far away. "Look at Wan Xian, what did the emperor ask her to do?" Concubine Su glanced at her. "Who knows? Maybe she's here to pick a husband." Shen Shuwei also looked over curiously and saw Miss Han holding a very small grey rabbit in her arms. It was exactly the same as Yuan Gungun's when he was a child. They were both wild rabbits after all. At this time, deep in the forest, the queen looked at the dog emperor who was chasing after her. The dog emperor would go wherever she went and would not be able to get away. Finally, the queen couldn't help but said, "Your Majesty, how can we hunt together?" The emperor said, "Queen, you haven't left the palace for a long time, so it would be better for you to hunt with me." "Queen, who wants to hunt with you?" At this time, the emperor was holding a bow and arrow. He noticed something strange in the grass not far away, so he drew the bow and fired the arrow. The queen also saw it and asked you to always follow me, and I will compete with you for prey. She drew her bow and fired arrows with the same target as the emperor. The two arrows hit the prey in the grass almost at the same time. When the emperor saw it, he turned to look at the queen. She looked dashing in her riding attire, but she might have been a little unfamiliar since she hadn't ridden a horse for a long time. The queen is good at archery. Your Majesty, thank you. The queen tightened her grip on the reins, clamped the horse's belly and walked towards the prey. The emperor did not fight with the queen and allowed her to get the prey. When the queen came to the grass, she saw a deer, which was shot by two arrows at the same time. The dog emperor's arrow skills were very accurate. She dismounted neatly and bent down to lift the prey when a python suddenly appeared from behind the tree and was spitting out snake bites. Just when the queen was about to catch the prey, the python suddenly attacked. After the horse was frightened, Sayazi ran away. Only then did the queen see a python behind the tree. Her pupils dilated, her body stiffened due to fright, and she forgot to react. By now it was too late to escape. When the emperor discovered the python, it was too late to think about its size. He quickly drew out his arrow feathers, drew his bow, aimed at the python's head, and fired an arrow. Then he drew out a second arrow with the target still being the head. When the arrow hit the python's head, blood immediately flowed out. Perhaps it was in unbearable pain, the python suddenly became irritable and opened its bloody mouth to try to bite people. At this time, the queen's legs were already weak from fear. She couldn't use any strength to escape. She watched the python attack her. The emperor ran over with his horse's belly. When he was close, he jumped off the horse, grabbed the queen's arm, and pulled her into his arms. He drew the sword on the horse with his right hand. "Queen, be careful." The queen felt herself being pulled into the arms of Wenquin. When she looked up, she saw the dog emperor, who was showing a nervous look as if he was facing a great enemy. The emperor clenched his sword and stabbed the python, but he didn't stab the vital point. The python was obviously enraged and began to attack fiercely. The queen reacted at this time. She looked back and saw the python with its bloody mouth open. She hurriedly shouted, "Your Majesty, be careful." The python was too big. As long as it didn't hit the vital point, the python would not die for a while. It is said that snakes should be hit at their 7-inch point, and the same should be true for pythons. In a hurry, the queen saw the arrow feathers on the deer, stretched out her hand to pull out the arrow feathers on the deer, and stabbed the python at its 7-inch point. The emperor discovered the queen's intention and frowned. "Queen, come back to me." At this time, the queen would not listen to the emperor's words. She had only one goal now, which was to kill the python. Seeing that the queen was disobedient, the emperor was so angry that he didn't know what to say. He rushed forward with his sword and chopped at the python's head. The python seemed to be huge in size, but it was very agile. It dodged the long sword and attacked the queen. At this time, the queen clenched the arrow feathers and stabbed the snake at its 7-inch point. The python screamed to the sky and opened its mouth to bite the queen. The distance was too close, and it was too late for the queen to escape. Seeing this, the emperor stepped forward and grabbed the queen's shoulders, pulled her into his arms, and used his body to protect the queen. His shoulder was bitten by the python. The queen saw the dog emperor using his body to protect herself, and her mind went blank for a while. She thought she had let go of her feelings for the dog emperor, but only now did she realize that she had never let go, she just didn't want to mention it. When he reacted, the emperor clenched his sword and stabbed the snake again. After the python struggled violently, it collapsed to the ground, spitting blood, and died. The queen saw that the dog emperor's shoulder was covered with blood, and she was immediately panicked. "Your Majesty, are you okay?" "I'm fine." The emperor looked up at the queen and looked at her up and down. There was a lot of blood on her body, and he didn't know if she was injured. "Are you injured anywhere?" The queen shook her head with red eyes. "I'm fine, but the emperor has lost a lot of blood. The emperor glanced at his right arm. Fortunately, he dodged in time and was not bitten much, otherwise this arm might be useless. He retracted his gaze and looked at the queen. It's good that the queen is not injured. It's nothing for me to be injured. You are the king of a country, how can you be injured? The queen was anxious at this time, and she stretched out her hand to check his injuries, but was stopped by the emperor. There is no imperial doctor or medicine here. It will be useless to see him. It is better to go and get the horse. If this horse runs away again, we will have to walk back. The emperor withdrew the secret guards in order to be alone with the emperor. Because of this, they were in such a dangerous situation. The queen looked back and found that her horse had been frightened and ran away. Only the dog emperor's horse was left there. She hurried forward to grab the reins and lead the horse over. There was only one horse left, and the two could only ride together. The queen sat in front, leaning against the dog emperor's chest. It had been a long time since they were close to each other. It was inevitable that they were a little embarrassed to be so close now. The emperor hugged the queen into his arms. It had been too long since they had been so close to each other on a horse. Suddenly, he missed them when they were young. The queen was very uncomfortable being hugged by the dog emperor. Thinking that the dog emperor had an injury on his arm, he could only let him go. The emperor pulled the reins and drove the horse slowly, coveting this moment of leisure and warmth. The queen watched the horse walk leisurely. She even walked faster than this, and she couldn't help but feel anxious. Your Majesty, can't you ride faster? If you don't bandage the wound in time, you will bleed a lot. The emperor lied with his eyes open. Queen, I'm injured, I can't ride too fast, it will only make the blood flow faster. The queen paused after hearing this. Because she was too worried about the dog emperor, she felt that what the dog emperor said made some sense, so she had to give up urging and let the horse walk slowly. At this time, Shen Shuwei was a little drowsy when she saw the seat. She touched the seat beside her and found that Sichuan was not there. She opened her eyes suddenly and found that the seat beside her was empty. Thinking of the time when she was anxious to find concubine Su, Sichuan should have run out with her at that time. It's over, Sichuan must have gone to find her. Sichuan is Xiao Jinyan's favorite pet. If she is lost, Xiao Jinyan will definitely be angry. Shen Shuwei didn't care about anything else, and went to find Sichuan with her skirt lifted. Concubine Su and Tao Liangyuan looked at Shen Shuwei in confusion, thinking that she was in a hurry to pee, because they saw her drinking a lot of tea just now. Shen Shuwei looked for a while, but she didn't see Sichuan and was so anxious. Could Sichuan be lost? Just when Shen Shuwei was anxious, she saw a man in black holding a snow-white cat from a distance. Who else could it be except Sichuan? No wonder he didn't come back for so long, it turned out that he was caught. She ran over with her skirt lifted. The man in black was a little surprised when he saw Shen Shuwei, and then he stopped when he saw her running over. Shen Shuwei ran over and glared at the man in black. Give Sichuan back to me quickly. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The prince longs for me every night after mastering thought reading. Author, Gongzi Yun Si. Chapter 429. After shouting, Shen Shuwei found that her tone was a bit aggressive. The other party was wearing night clothes and was very likely a bad guy who would kill without blinking an eye. If she angered the man in black and she couldn't beat him, she would just play ball. But she couldn't control her tone when she held Xiao Jinyan's pet. Thinking back to when Sichuan was just sleepy, Xiao Jinyan thought she wanted to poison Sichuan and almost locked her up in Xiao Xiang Pavilion. Shen Shuwei smiled politely. Well, Sichuan got lost, thank you for sending it back. The contrast was so great that the man in black was stunned for a moment. Shen Shuwei saw that the man in black had a flat reaction. Could it be that she spoke too gently and thought she was easy to bully? She looked at Swichuan in the man in black's arms, put her hands on her waist and ordered like a master, "Swichuan, come here." The man in black saw Shen Shui's action of putting her hands on her waist, and the tone of command was very similar to Xiaju. While the man in black was stunned, Swichuan kicked his limbs to break free from the man in black's arms and jumped down, running to Shen Shui at the fastest speed. Shen Shui happily bent down to pick up Swichuan and touched its furry head. The ham sausage she had fed for more than 2 years was not in vain. She still listened to her. When Swichuan struggled, the man in black did not stop him. He watched Swichuan run to Shen Shui and let her pick him up, which made him make a bold guess. "Is this pet yours?" Shen Shui hugged Swichuan in her arms tightly, thinking that the man in black must have discovered that Swichuan was human and wanted to take it away. "This is my husband's pet and it is also mine. Don't think about taking it away." The man in black knew that the husband in Shen Shui's mouth was Xiao Jinyan. He asked again without giving up, "Who named Swichuan?" Shen Shui said, "Of course it's my husband. The pet he raises is naturally named by him." The man in black frowned when he heard this. "Xiao Jinyan's pet, is it a coincidence or is there something strange?" At this moment, there were chaotic footsteps all around, and they were rushing towards the side at a lightning speed. The man in black knew that a group of people were rushing over here quickly. After all, it was the royal enclosure, and there were many guards of the imperial guards. In order not to alarm others, the man in black had to leave first. Shen Shui's hand just took out a diarrhea medicine, and was about to wait for an opportunity to inject it into the man in black, but she saw the man running away. She raised the needle in her hand, which had been opened. If it was not used in a short time, it would be wasted. Qin Xiao ran over quickly and was relieved to see Shen Shui safe and sound. "Crown Princess, are you okay?" Shen Shui raised her head and saw Qin Xiao suddenly running over, and shook her head, "I'm fine." As soon as the voice fell, she saw a group of guards following Qin Xiao. They are probably all here to find her. It was noon, and the hunting princes and ministers came back one after another. Shen Shui saw Xiao Jinyan, who was riding a tall horse, from a distance. He was wearing a black brocade robe and a black wristband, and he looked heroic. Without looking at the prey on the horse, she knew that Xiao Jinyan had returned with a full load. Qin Xiao had already gone to meet him. Xiao Jinyan jumped off the horse and threw the reins in his hand to Qin Xiao, and he walked straight towards Shen Shui. When the others approached, Shen Shui saw that Xiao Jinyan was sweating profusely. She picked up the teapot and poured a glass of water for Xiao Jinyan. "Your Highness, drink water." Xiao Jinyan was thirsty, so he took the teacup and drank a few sips to moisten his throat. Just then, someone exclaimed, "The emperor is injured." The current emperor was injured, and the princes and ministers were all shocked, and the scene was a little flustered for a while. When Shen Shui followed Xiao Jinyan to the emperor's tent, the imperial doctor was treating the emperor's wound. The queen stood aside, her hair was a little messy, her body was still stained with blood, and she was looking at the emperor on the bed anxiously. Xiao Jinyu stood beside the queen to make sure that the queen was not injured, and then asked worriedly, "Mother, how did the father get injured?" The queen roughly told the story of encountering the python. Just hearing it was thrilling. After the imperial physician diagnosed that the emperor was fine except for his arm injury, the queen was relieved. "The emperor was injured to save me." The python was really ferocious. Xiao Jinyu secretly sweated after hearing this. It was too thrilling. He suddenly thought of the secret guards. What about the secret guards? My father and mother met the python, but the secret guards didn't show up to save them? Isn't this dereliction of duty? The queen was scared at the time, and only then did she think of the secret guards, who is on duty today. This eunuch raised his head and looked at the emperor on the bed. For a moment, he didn't know how to explain it. The emperor coughed twice. I don't think they follow me and affect my hunting, so I didn't let them follow. The tent suddenly became quiet. Who dared to refute the emperor's order? Even the queen would not speak out about the emperor in front of so many people. Growing up in the general's mansion, she knew that the emperor loved face and had to give it to the emperor and the prince even if he was right. Therefore, the queen would only lose her temper behind people's backs, and never embarrass the emperor in front of everyone. After confirming that the emperor was fine, the princes and ministers all withdrew, leaving only the queen, and suddenly became very quiet. The queen looked at the wound on the emperor's right arm, and she was still frightened when she thought of the thrilling scene at that time. How could the emperor be so confused? How could letting the secret guards follow affect the hunting? Fortunately, there was no danger today, otherwise the consequences would be unimaginable. The emperor nodded in agreement with a guilty conscience. The queen is right, I was careless. The queen looked at the emperor's injured arm. She had just heard from the imperial doctor that the wound was a bit deep. Even though it was bandaged, the wound was still shocking. Does it still hurt? The emperor nodded weakly. Queen, I am a little thirsty. After hearing this, the queen stood up and came to the table. She picked up the teapot and poured a glass of water. She turned around and sat down in front of the bed. I, my concubine, feed you. At this time, the queen was worried that the emperor was injured, and he was injured because of saving her, so she was naturally more gentle than before. The emperor looked up at the queen. Such a rare tenderness made him feel that the hurt was worth it. Seeing that the dog emperor was only looking at her and not drinking water, the queen tried her best to control her voice. Why is the emperor looking at my concubine? Aren't you thirsty? The emperor drank some water obediently, and then said quietly, it's rare for a queen to be so gentle. Queen. After Xiao Jinyu came back, he saw Miss Han sitting at the table holding a rabbit, so he walked over with his legs up. Miss Han, are you hungry? Miss Han raised her head and looked at Xiao Jinyu, thinking about what Wan Xian said. She felt a little uncomfortable. Seeing her staring at him without speaking, Xiao Jinyu couldn't help but feel anxious. What's wrong? Miss Han looked at it for a while before slowly speaking. I don't think I've ever asked you if you know how to take concubines. In Miss Han's eyes, Xiao Jinyu would be his official wife if he married her. Xiao Jinyu breathed a sigh of relief and chuckled. I thought it was something. You can ask now. Miss Han didn't hesitate and asked directly, then do you know how to take a concubine? Xiao Jinyu answered in 2 words seriously, no. Miss Han felt relieved and said, that's good. Xiao Jinyu asked again, are you hungry? Miss Han nodded. She only ate breakfast and would be hungry by now. I heard that my sister-in-law eats barbecue by herself. Just wait, I'll get some. Xiao Jinyu happily turned around and left the camp. After walking a few steps, he saw Wan Xian walking towards him and said to him, King Yu. Xiao Jinyu asked, why are you here? Wan Xian said softly, the daughter of the people has just cooked some dishes. I wanted to send them to King Yu to try, but I am afraid that the food made by the people will not be on the table, and I am afraid that King Yu will not like it. Xiao Jinyu looked surprised, so you can cook? Miss Han can't even tell the difference between salt and sugar. When Wan Xian heard this, her eyes and eyebrows were filled with smiles. A common girl has heard from her mother since she was a child that the girl's family has some cooking skills so that she can cook for her husband in the future. Xiao Jinyu smiled and said, then your husband is blessed with good food. I don't have that good fortune. Miss Han doesn't know how to cook, but it's okay. I have 2 cooks here. Let the cook cook whatever you want. The smile on Wan Xian's lips froze, and then she said warmly, would King Yu want to try it? Xiao Jinyu waved his hand. Miss Han said yesterday that the barbecue at the Crown Princess's place tastes good. I will go to the Crown Princess place now and bring back some barbecue for Miss Han to try. Wan Xian. After Xiao Jinyu finished speaking, he raised his feet and left. Wan Xi and spent a lot of time preparing the dishes for the table, but no one ate them. Xiao Jinyan hunted a lot of game, asked Qin Xiao and Wei Qi to clean it up, and then grilled it in Chengzi. The condiments and ingredients are all ready, just waiting for the game in Chengzi's hand to be brought to the table. Concubine Su and Tao Liangyuan stayed with coveted faces, just to eat the freshly roasted game. After they were baked, Xiao Jinyan had some sent to the empress. Xiao Jinyu could smell the aroma of barbecue from a distance. When he got closer, he happened to hear the prince's brother sending people to deliver barbecue to his father, the queen, and his mother. "Brother, why didn't you think of giving me some?" It wasn't that Xiao Jinyan didn't expect it, but just as he was about to speak, Xiao Jinyu came. "Aren't you here?" Xiao Jinyu laughed twice and looked at the roasted game in Chengzi's hand. "It should be pheasant, and there is also a wild robe." The game Chengzi roasted was delicious. Miss Han kept praising it after eating it. "I didn't expect it to be such a coincidence today." Xiao Jinyan. Lai Seng Ding is good at technology. When his younger brother came, of course Xiao Jinyan would not let him go back empty-handed, so he cut up half a chicken and half a wild robe, thinking that this would be enough for them to eat. As a result, Xiao Jinyu took away a wild pigeon before leaving, including the hot sauce, and left. Shen Chuwei looked at Xiao Jinyu's actions. He was indeed a wife slave. He would think of his daughter-in-law any delicious food. Even the only wild pigeon was taken away. She hadn't tasted it yet. Xiao Jinyan saw Shen Chu's slightly achy expression and realized that Xiao Jinyu took away the wild pigeon she wanted to eat. Shen Chuwei was lying on the couch after eating and drinking, and saw Xiao Jinyan coming in with a white cat in his arms. She subconsciously touched the snowball lying next to her. Yes, what Xiao Jinyan was holding in her arms was. If you look closely, you can see that there is a prints on the cat's forehead. It is all white, but unlike the snowballs, there are markings on the white fur. It's the white tiger. Xiao Jinyan placed the little guy in his arms next to Shen Chuwei. "I found this while hunting. If you like it, you can stay." Shen Chuwei said, "I like it. When it grows up, I will be able to act like a fox and a tiger." Xiao Jinyan chuckled, "Aren't you afraid? Although the tiger is ferocious, if you raise it from a young age, it will protect its owner." Shen Chuwei lowered his head and looked at the little white tiger. He was so small, and he didn't know if he had been weaned. Keep it as a pet for now. Xiao Jinyan thought about raising it as a cat when he was a child, and then locking him in a zoo when he grew up. After delivering the pets, Xiao Jinyan came out of the tent. As Xiao Jinyan also loves his wife, since his wife didn't get to eat wild pigeons, he naturally had to hunt a few to satisfy her craving. The man in black saw Xiao Jinyan riding a horse into the woods and quickly followed him. "The prince longs for me every night after mastering thought reading." Author, Gongzi Yun Si. Chapter 430. Xiao Jinyan was not riding fast, because there were many wild pigeons in the woods, and he arrived in a short while. When he arrived at the place where wild pigeons often appeared, Xiao Jinyan tightened the reins, and when the horse stopped, he drew out the arrow feathers, drew the bow and aimed at the target to prepare to shoot the arrow. He suddenly aimed at the tree not far away, released the arrow and shot. The arrow feathers flew forward quickly, and a hand suddenly stretched out from behind the tree and caught the arrow feathers steadily. A closer look revealed that the man used 2 fingers. Xiao Jinyan looked coldly at a man in black who came out from behind the tree. When he came out of the tent, he vaguely felt that someone was following him, but the other party was very good at martial arts and was very good at hiding his breath. "Who are you? How dare you trespass into the royal enclosure?" The man in black took a look at the arrow feathers in his hand and threw them to the tree behind him. The arrow feathers hit the trunk steadily. He seemed to be walking slowly, but in fact, in just a moment, he was in front of Xiao Jinyan. Xiao Jinyan was amazed at the speed of the man in black, which also showed that the man in black's martial arts was beyond his imagination. The man in black said in a low voice, "It doesn't matter who I am, I just want to know how Sichuan got into your hands." When Xiao Jinyan heard about Sichuan, doubt flashed in his eyes. Why did the man in black in front of him mention Sichuan? "Sichuan is my pet, what does it have to do with you?" Lie, the man in black's eyes turned cold, and he picked a few leaves and shot them at Xiao Jinyan. The ordinary leaves at first looked like hidden weapons, with invisible power. Xiao Jinyan had long been alert that the man in black would attack. He drew out his sword neatly, and with a few swishes, he swept the leaves flying to the ground. The man in black did not let go, and drew out a soft sword from his waist and stabbed at Xiao Jinyan. After several rounds, Xiao Jinyan gradually lost the battle. The man in black was too good at martial arts. After being hit by a palm from the man in black, Xiao Jinyan took several steps back, and a fishy sweetness surged in his throat. He resisted and didn't spit it out. "I just felt like my internal organs were displaced and I felt pain." The man in black pointed his sword at Xiao Jinyan. "Why is Sichuan in your hands? Where did you take Fengwu?" Xiao Jinyan said coldly, "Sichuan was raised by me. I don't know why you are forcing me. I don't know Fengwu either." The man in black became even angrier when he heard this. "You actually said you don't know Fengwu." He clenched his soft sword and stabbed Xiao Jinyan again. Xiao Jinyan stood up with the help of the tree and raised his sword to meet him. At this time, in the tent, Shen Shuwei lowered his head and looked at the little tiger cub beside him. As the king of the forest, he was very timid when he was young. The strange place, the strange smell, and Sichuan arching his body and baring his teeth frightened the little tiger cub and trembled. Sichuan sniffed closer. No matter how small the king of the forest was, he still exuded the breath of a beast. Sichuan opened his claws and scratched the little tiger cub. "Meow." The frightened little tiger cub turned around and got into Shen Shuwei's arms, facing Sichuan with his butt, shivering. Shen Shuwei looked at the little tiger cub shivering with fear, and then looked at Sichuan, who was so fierce. "Sichuan, you can't bully the weak." Sichuan retracted his claws, looked at Shen Shuwei with his blue eyes, and called out innocently, "Meow." Shen Shuwei picked up the little tiger cub, and saw that the little tiger cub shrank his fluffy little head and stared at Shen Shuwei timidly. The little tiger was still very cute when he was young. "Meow," Sichuan called out louder, then turned around and jumped off the bed and ran out. Shen Shuwei was left alone in a mess. Looking at the little tiger cub with innocent eyes, Sichuan was jealous. After a moment of hesitation, she put the little tiger cub into the frame, and then lifted her skirt to chase Sichuan. From a distance, she saw Sichuan running towards the woods. Shen Shuwei wanted to cry but had no tears. Why did she run? She was really too lazy to move, but when she saw Sichuan running into the woods, she had to chase him. If she lost him, she would be the one who would feel sad. Shen Shuwei tucked the hem of her skirt into her belt and ran quickly. The deeper she went into the woods, the more she could feel the coolness under the shade of the sky. Shen Shuwei had never run so far in her life. Just when she was about to run, she heard the sound of fighting. She stopped and looked in the direction of the sound, and saw two figures in the woods. She recognized one of them as Xiao Jinyan at a glance, and the other man in black seemed to be the one holding Sichuan today. Could it be that the man in black was an assassin who came to assassinate Xiao Jinyan on purpose? Thinking of this possibility, Shen Shuwei sneaked over and took out the laxative that she had no chance to use today. She thought it would be wasted. "It seems that this laxative is destined for you and you must use it." Just as she approached, she saw Xiao Jinyan being hit by the man in black, and she was immediately heartbroken. Just as the man in black swung his sword at Xiao Jinyan, Shen Shuwei didn't care about anything else and rushed over immediately. He grabbed the man in black's hand and blocked the sword from stabbing Xiao Jinyan. At the same time, he stabbed the needle in his hand into the man in black's arm with his other hand. It was just a matter of a moment. The man in black had actually discovered that Shen Shuwei was nearby, but he didn't take her seriously. He didn't expect her to rush out desperately. He withdrew his strength, otherwise Shen Shuwei would not be able to stop him at all. Xiao Jinyan saw Shen Shuwei coming, frowned, stepped forward and pulled her into his arms, fearing that the man in black would attack her. "Why are you here?" Shen Shuwei raised her head and looked at Xiao Jinyan, and found that there was blood at the corner of his mouth. She guessed that he must have suffered internal injuries, all caused by the man in black. "I came to find Swichuan. I saw someone bullying your highness, so I came over." "Your highness, you are injured." "I'm fine." Xiao Jinyan held her in his arms with a cold face, and glanced at the man in black with cold eyes. "What do you want?" The man in black said coldly, "I just want to know why Swichuan is in your hands. And where is Feng Wu? If you don't tell the truth, don't blame me for being rude." Xiao Jinyan said, "I don't understand what you are talking about. Swichuan is my pet. As for Feng Wu, I don't remember her." When Shen Shuwei heard Feng Wu, could it be the little girl in the secret compartment? Don't remember? Forgot. So the last time she asked Xiao Jinyan, he said he didn't remember. The man in black raised the soft sword in his hand, but he didn't hear the answer he wanted to hear, so he was furious. "You are obviously lying. Your highness will not lie. Besides, Swichuan is obviously your highness's pet. You are deliberately looking for an excuse to monopolize it. I tell you, even if you take Swichuan away, Swichuan will not listen to you. It is very fierce and only listens to its master." Shen Shuwei said, looking at Swichuan who came out of the bushes, "If you have the guts, call it and see if it will follow you." Xiao Jinyan looked at Shen Shuwei in his arms and kept provoking the man in black. He frowned and pressed her into his arms. "Shut up for me." Shen Shuwei nodded obediently. "I listen to your highness." The man in black saw Xiao Jinyan's move to protect Shen Shuwei. He thought that Xiao Ju also protected Xiao Jinyan in the past. What happened? He actually said he didn't remember? If he hadn't seen Swichuan, he wouldn't have found Xiao Jinyan. I'm afraid he would never know that Xiao Ju protected such an ungrateful person in his life. The man in black looked at Swichuan, who was looking at them curiously with his head raised. Swichuan only listened to Xiaju, and he could not order her around. "Wait a minute, can we be sure that the Swichuan in front of us is Xiaju's pet? Let Xiao Jinyan order her around and we will know. Swichuan only listens to Xiaju." The man in black looked at Xiao Jinyan. "If you can let Swichuan follow you, it means that Swichuan is your pet, and I will not bother about Swichuan anymore." Xiao Jinyan snorted coldly, "My pet will naturally follow me." He looked at Swichuan and ordered, "Swichuan, come here." Swichuan glanced at the man in black, and then walked towards Xiao Jinyan with elegant steps in the black's expectant eyes. Xiao Jinyan was not surprised. He bent down to pick up Swichuan, raised his head and looked at the man in black. "Can this be proved now?" The man in black frowned. Did he make a mistake? Just when the man in black was puzzled, he suddenly felt a cramp in his stomach. The feeling was too stimulating, and his face turned pale. Without bothering to ask further questions, she used Qinggong to quickly leave here. Shen Shuwei saw the man in black turn around and run away, so she guessed that the drug was working. Xiao Jinyan saw the man in black leave, and then he breathed a sigh of relief. He lowered his eyes and looked at Shen Shuwei, and said in a deep voice, "Do you know that it was very dangerous just now?" Shen Shuwei raised his head and looked at Xiao Jinyan. His eyes looked at the bleeding corner of his mouth, and took out a small handkerchief to wipe the blood that had not dried yet. "Of course I know, so I came. In this case, you should hide and protect yourself, instead of rushing out. In case something happens." Xiao Jinyan couldn't say it anymore. In case the man in black was bloodthirsty and killed innocent people indiscriminately, the consequences would be disastrous. Then I can't just leave your highness alone. Shen Shuwei wiped her hands clean and took them back, continuing, I secretly gave the black-clothed man a laxative. The laxative is very powerful. When the effect of the drug wears off, the man will be exhausted. After hearing this, Xiao Jinyan was stunned, with a flash of surprise in his eyes. When did you give the black-clothed man a laxative? Shen Shuwei said, it was just a few seconds before your highness held me in his arms. We worked well together and the black-clothed man didn't notice. This time I can only say it's lucky. Xiao Jinyan sighed helplessly, there won't be a next time. I know. Shen Shuwei verbally agreed, but next time she encounters this situation, she will still do her own thing. Xiao Jinyan stuffed Sichuan into her arms. Hold Sichuan. Shen Shuwei obediently held Sichuan in her arms. Xiao Jinyan whistled, and the horse that had run far away ran back quickly. Xiao Jinyan had internal injuries and it was a bit difficult for him to get on the horse. When he stretched out his hand to carry Shen Shuwei onto the horse's back, a fishy sweetness surged in his throat, and he forced himself to swallow it back. He wanted to catch wild pigeons to satisfy Xiaoju's craving, but it was impossible today. Shen Shuwei hadn't ridden with Xiao Jinyan for a long time. I remember the first time they rode together was also during the autumn hunting. Who would have thought that when they came to the autumn hunting again, they both had 2 babies. I couldn't help but sigh that time passed so quickly. Thinking of what the man in black said, she looked up at Xiao Jinyan and asked curiously, Your Highness, who is Feng Wu?